If you want to get China really angry, then why not send an aircraft carrier to the Pacific to join the United States in military exercises off the coast of Japan? Well, the UK is doing just that, and it's upsetting China in other ways too, by inviting thousands of residents of Hong Kong to make Britain home, and with plans to ban the telecom giant Huawei from British 5G networks. This is Roundtable. Hello and welcome from me, David Foster. So what is behind the worsening relationship between the two nations, and why have things gone downhill so rapidly? Tensions have soured in recent months over allegations of espionage and human rights abuses. Because of Beijing's new security law for Hong Kong, the UK has offered 3 million people from Hong Kong a path to British citizenship. In the past year, the British government has expelled 3 Chinese spies posing as journalists, according to the Daily Telegraph newspaper. Tech security concerns have prompted the UK Prime Minister to ban the Chinese telecoms giant Huawei from its 5G networks. And after the UK regulator suspended the license of Chinese state TV news, China hit back by taking BBC World News off air. China has a track record of punishing what it sees as slights with commercial countermeasures. The Chinese government imposed high tariffs on Australian goods after Australia's government backed a global inquiry into the origins of COVID-19. So why has there been such a marked shift in the UK government's attitude towards China? And are the two heading for a new Cold War? Well, I'm delighted to say we can welcome back to Roundtable out of Bristol in the United Kingdom, Dr. Winnie King, policy analyst and expert in Chinese political economy. We go to London, where we see Terry Chapendama, expert on UK-China trade. And then we cross to Beijing and we welcome Andy Mock, Senior Fellow at the Centre for China and Globalisation. That's a think tank based in China's capital. Andy, I'm going to come to you first of all. So you are broadly supportive of the Chinese government, and yet it's been using what some might call injudicious language, certainly not diplomatic language, about what the UK has been doing. What's upsetting it the most?
Well, I think certainly there is a clash of norms going on here. So some refer to this as quote unquote wolf warrior diplomacy. It's hostile language. But I think if we step back and look at it from a more objective perspective, diplomacy really is all about carrots and sticks, cajolery, as well as sometimes threats. So I think that certainly the behavior of China's foreign ministry, its diplomats, by an objective measure, really is not so surprising or so outside of established norms.
But what is it upset about?
Well, I think China is upset with the UK about certain positions that it has taken. Certainly, we look at the situation with the China Global Television Network, the most recent statements by Foreign Minister Rob, other things as well, its stance on Hong Kong, Xinjiang, the list goes on and on. And I think from a Chinese perspective, it is very disappointing that some have referred to this as China and the UK going from a golden age to an ice age.
And hopefully, you talked about I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you mentioned Dominic Raab there, the UK's foreign secretary. Let's hear what he had to say about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province, where there have been accusations that millions of people have been put into forced labour.
It is truly horrific. Barbarism we had hoped lost to another era being practiced today as we speak in one of the leading members of the international community. Mr. Speaker, we have a moral duty to respond.
Okay, so Dominic Raab is saying there is a moral duty to respond. Does China think that that is interfering in its own affairs?
I think clearly from China's position, this is an interference in its internal affairs, as is Hong Kong, as is Taiwan, as is Tibet. And I think the real issue here for the UK is perhaps not recognizing the enormous asymmetry in cost in having an unfriendly relationship with China, in that for the UK, this is potentially existential, whereas unfriendly relations with the UK from China's perspective is not so much. And we need to look very briefly at why. Of course, from an economic and population perspective, China is much, much larger. We all know this. But also from a shifting economic and political center of gravity, we can see the momentum is moving from a transatlantic to a locus of in the Pacific in Asia. And I think the other final point with this is that we look at it from a time perspective. So we see certain members of parliament, Tom Tugendhat and his friends in the China Research Group in particular, castigating some European countries for saying that they are selling out for short-term gain their long-term interests by working with China. But I think they have it precisely backwards. Because if we think about, is China's economy going to shrink or get bigger in the future? And perhaps most importantly, is China's technological position going to strengthen in the future, whether that's 10 or 50 years from now? And which side of you want to be on?
And Andy, I don't want to stop you mid-flow, but I want to bring our other guests in. And Winnie, I'm going to come to you first of all. So there is Andy Mock saying that Britain needs China. Things are only going to get stronger in Beijing, and the UK is looking at a global world market now rather than being part of the European Union. How much does the UK depend on its trade with China?
The UK depends on trade with China, its economic relationship with China in a variety of different ways. It's not just a matter of import and exports, but it also has to do with the level of investment that comes in from China, as well as the really symbolic value that the bilateral relationship holds with regards to the idea that post-Brexit, you can actually promote a domestic economy independent without the European Union. The UK can prosper without the European Union. There's a lot of value in terms of the fact that China has in the form of Huawei, has a large role to play with regards to securing a robust telecommunications and tech sector in the UK. So there's a lot of different things that need to be taken into account.
Yeah, so Winnie, can I just go through a couple of figures? 2019 UK imports from China, 49 billion, UK exports, 31 billion. I'm talking pounds here. So we import much more than we export if you are British. 1999, China was 26th on the UK export list. It's moved up to 6th. So it's a massive market for the UK. So why would Britain risk upsetting such an important customer?
A big part of it has to do with the fact that the transatlantic relationship with the United States is at the core of UK foreign policy. And so this special relationship that has long been touted, which Boris Johnson very clearly was holding line to while President Trump was in power, illustrates that when it comes to UK-Chinese relations, the Great Britain has to really maneuver quite a tightrope, if you might say.
Yeah, so if you're not with me, you're against me in Trump's terms. So you've got to be against China if I'm against China.
Under Trump, this is quite what we're trying to see.
So why now? Why is this happening now when we have a new US president, when we have Britain out of the European Union? They are continuing to do things that really get on the Chinese government's nerves, like sending this aircraft carrier to take part in maritime war exercises off the coast of Japan. Why continue poking the tiger?
There's two things. This is not new. Chinese containment of China, or China's containment, has been going on since the 1990s. It's a debate that's been going on in terms of trying to secure not just how China grows, but how America's allies within the region actually can be secured. When Trump came to power, he introduced a new narrative within the American domestic political and economic kind of
Winnie, I'm
sphere.
sorry to cut you short. I do get that. I'm asking why continue when Trump's no longer there?
You continue it. Biden continues it because Trump has changed the narrative. It's a shift that has been embraced not just by the Republicans wholeheartedly, but also by the Democrats. And it's something that the trade war that occurred under Trump has reinforced. And Biden is not in any position. If you look at the Senate, for instance, Biden's not in any position to move strongly away from that.
All right. Okay. So it's a similar narrative, if a different tone. Terry, good to have you on the program. You tell people how to do business in China. Would you be telling UK businesses that now's a good time to do it, or not, given the atmosphere?
It's always a good time to do business in China as things are going. Just to illustrate with an example, if you look at the luxury market in 2020, despite the pandemic, you saw incredible growth in China. And that was driven in part by China exiting its lockdown restrictions before, for example, Europe and the United States. And there was a lot of revenge spending in terms of people satisfying latent demand. So in terms of the market is still booming. I don't think we're going to get those once in a lifetime events in 2021. So it might be a year of reflection. But China's a play that you're making not just for 2021, but you're looking towards 2030 or 2040. So the question is...
So is what the UK is doing at the moment quite dangerous in commercial terms for British and other, well, let's say just simply British businesses?
So David, what I would contend is China understands what the game is here. And the game is they know Britain is for sale. We don't make that much. We don't have anything we can extract from the ground. And we're probably going to lose a large amount of our financial services market to the EU. So China's aware that Britain's for sale. And they can play a very coy game and say, we will wait for you to come to the table, but the longer you leave it, the more expensive it is to do business with us. So from a China perspective, they look at the United Kingdom and they just say it's a question of when, not if. The sad part from a UK perspective is our government isn't far-sighted enough to realize this is the time to strike. This is the time to put ourselves, on good terms with China and, try and get access to those opportunities.
But that's not going to happen, Terry, I would suggest, as long as the British government wants to remain on extremely friendly terms with the United States administration and still has hopes of getting a trade deal.
So, agreed. And so if we go back to what Dr. Winnie King did say, and I think this was a very good point, Britain walks that tightrope of having to play to multiple audiences simultaneously. So from my perspective, I want to know that we're building closer ties with China. I think there are some more hawkish people in the Conservative Party that want us to take a strong line on human rights abuses, even though Britain has an imperial history that kind of renders its message hollow. And then we also have to play nicely with the United States, understanding that we have a relationship with them.
Andy, I'll come back. Terry, I'll come back to you in just a moment, if I may, to ask you about specifics of business. But I want to give Andy a chance here. I'm hearing that this is bluff and bluster, perhaps, from both sides, that China should be prepared just to wait it out because it knows that the UK is barking loudly, but it doesn't really have much of a bite. Is that what you think?
I think we really have to see, David, because I think one of the things that a point to make here is that certainly the UK is walking a tightrope, but that it's also important to recognize that I think it was on March 1, 1848, that a British statesman said that Britain has no eternal friends and no eternal enemies, only eternal interests. And it's their duty to pursue those interests. And again, to go back to my earlier point, that we see the center of economic gravity has already shifted to Asia. We look at what China is doing in terms of governance. Look at how it handled the pandemic, the resilience from a public health perspective, from an economic perspective. that has laid the groundwork for this economic recovery, as well as this boom in luxury sales that was just mentioned. And I think that we need to recognize here that there are very, very significant costs of rhetoric as well as behavior. So while I do agree, David, that perhaps there are opportunities for the UK to put this tiff, if we want to call it this, behind it, that there may be long-term repercussions for this. And countries,
yeah, Andy, I want to bring in.
Really need to keep this in mind.
I want to bring in a Chinese official here, Liu Xiaoming, China's ambassador to the UK, in response to what Dominic Raab said. And it's the use of language that I find most interesting. We'll ask you what you think of it in just a second.
On Xinjiang, the UK disregarded the facts, confused right and wrong, flaunted slanders recklessly at China's Xinjiang-related policies, and interfere in China's internal affairs by raising the so-called human rights issue in Xinjiang, bilaterally and multilaterally. These actions have seriously poisoned the atmosphere of China-UK relationship.
So, Andy, that is pretty serious language, isn't it? Slander, seriously poisoned. Is this China responding just because it feels it has to?
I think it's certainly both, David. Certainly the facts matter and the facts on the ground matter. But in politics, in media, as we all know, image is important as well. And we see that with the US State Department in the last hours of Secretary of State Pompeo's tenure, the declaration of the situation in Xinjiang being a genocide. And then not that long ago, I think this was a couple of days ago, State Department lawyers came out saying, well, this might be human rights abuses, but it's not genocide. I think The Economist came out with a piece.
Some people say it is, some people say it isn't. I mean, I have to be fair to you and say that at the moment it hasn't been defined as such by an awful lot of countries, but by many others it has too. Andy, I will come back to you in just a moment. I want to ask Winnie about this military exercise off the coast of Japan. We've got Mike Ben Wallace, I beg his pardon, who's the UK Defence Secretary, saying we're upholding the rules-based international system, promoting our shared security and prosperity, and he talks about partners. Is this really going to aggravate Beijing, do you think?
Yes, it will. Basically, what Great Britain is doing in its foreign policy is its effort to diversify its alliances and to try and promote its regional relations. So, for instance, later in 2021, in this year, the UK is sending the HMS Queen Elizabeth Carrier Strike Group to the Asia Pacific to try and bolster military relations. The idea, as I mentioned before, about Chinese containment is reinforced by this, and the Chinese will not take this lightly. So when it comes to, I mean, you mentioned before about Dominic Raab and the issue of the Uyghurs, the day after Dominic Raab makes this announcement, we also have Boris Johnson calling to say that he wants to resume formal trade discussions with China. It falls back in line with the idea that I was talking about the tightrope, but really the military concerns, activities that are going to be concerning the Chinese are definitely going to come into play if Boris is genuinely trying to resume.
And Taiwan could be a flashpoint in this case, could it not? If things get slightly out of hand, if it goes beyond rhetoric and we see incidents, if not squaring up, then certainly some kind of friction in the South China Sea where China's being accused of being expansionist.
So from China's perspective, Taiwan has nothing to do with it being expansionist. But Taiwan.
No, I do get that. I'm just putting the two issues side by side, Winnie.
I agree. So Taiwan is always a flashpoint for the Chinese. But if we look at what's going on with the UK in Asia Pacific, the UK doesn't engage directly on the issue of Taiwan. It does comment on it, but in terms of the military ties and military activities and exercises, it's engaging more with Japan and the US. But Taiwan is always an issue. Yes.
Terry, I want to talk business with you, not on a personal level, but when it comes to the UK and China. China's investment, both in terms of time and money in the UK, is pretty enormous. I think it has a 10% stake in Heathrow. It bought up British Steel. It's got money going into power stations, etc., etc. It's a very important market in many ways for China, isn't it?
Absolutely. And when you talk to Chinese investors, and I've had these discussions in a number of different countries, it's the same message. They understand that there's still that soft value that comes with British investments. It's like a halo effect. So, if you look at the number of Chinese entities that have purchased British brands and iconic brands, Aquascutum being an example, and there are many others, you suddenly realize that there is value and it plays well at home to say you've acquired British assets. And China understands that. But for how long that soft glow of Britishness retains a value, only time will tell. But I think Britain will always be a good place to do business because it is a business-friendly country. And I think China and Chinese investors particularly like the simplicity of doing business in the United Kingdom.
I think Britain gets... Oops, sorry.
No, I was also going to say, and I think also just that foothold in Britain, cements that Chinese view of where we're building back our empire, well, use the word loosely, in the way that we were probably looking at a few hundred years ago when, China was a far bigger player in terms of global GDP.
I want to ask you, and this is for anybody, but I'll start with you on this one, Terry. When you think things have got pretty serious, is when what happens? Would it be if the exchange of students between the two countries, mostly Chinese, coming to Britain, which I think is worth $1.75 billion to the UK every year, if that is stopped? What will signal that this has got very, very serious indeed?
For me, it will be when China reverses its commitment to infrastructure investment in the United Kingdom. As we know from the London-based contingent or the Britain-based contingent on this call, our infrastructure is not amazing. A lot of it's creaking, in need of modernization. And more importantly, we do not have the funds.
Okay. Andy, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left. I'd like a word from you and then back to Winnie to wrap us all up. Do you think China and the UK will patch this up, or is it going to take quite a lot at the moment? And if so, what?
Well, I certainly see the potential because I think one of the hallmarks of British politics and British foreign policy, again, to refer to the statement by Lord Palmerston, is pragmatism. And one thing the UK needs now more than anything else is a reliable partner. And China, precisely because it's a single-party authoritarian state, provides stability and predictability. And we know, not just in business, but in politics as well, this is invaluable. On the other hand, the United States, structurally, because of its two-party system, is inherently unstable. And we could see this policy whiplash between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. If there's another Trump-like administration after Biden, we'll see a similar whiplash. And this would be disastrous, I think, for British interests.
Okay,
so,
Winnie, a quick word. Sorry to cut you off, Andy. I've got to go to Winnie because we've only got a couple of minutes. So is Britain able to do anything about the fact that it appears to be caught between these two major powers?
Yeah, I think in all honesty, it could do exactly what it's doing now, walking this tightrope where you need to recognize that acknowledging U.S. concerns while simultaneously prioritizing Britain's own domestic economy. So if we're talking about the issues of infrastructure, where the Tory party's focus on build policy, a large part of this really recognizes that not only that China has a precedent of actually participating in building British infrastructure, but there's a large private sector role that needs to be played, needs to be filled, and that the Chinese have a big role to play in that. But simultaneously, when it comes to promoting the area of the luxury sector, as Terry Chapendama pointed out, brands like Burberry, you need China. And so it becomes a matter of trying to move pieces on the chessboard appropriately in order to secure your position, not just with regards to foreign diplomacy, but also economic development.
Very quickly, Winnie, we've touched on sensitive issues when thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people out of Hong Kong come to live in Britain? Will that be another source of major friction, or is that just something that we know is going to happen?
The Chinese government has already made it clear that when it comes to Hong Kong people who are going to Britain, that's their right to do so. They have the British have provided the opportunity for that. There are, in truth, a lot of mainland Chinese people who would be very happy to live in Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government have recognized, you know what? Then that just means it is what it is, right? The shift in terms of the representation of the institutions will therefore evolve.
Each one of you has, in your own way, wrapped it up very, very succinctly indeed. And we thank you for helping us to find our way through this labyrinthine network of international connections. Terry Chapendama, Andy Mock, Winnie King, we thank you for being on the program. And we thank you wherever you happen to be catching up with this edition of Roundtable. From me, David Foster, until next time, a very goodbye.